Hello, everybody. Let's get started. My name is Payne, and I go with Payne. I'm a senior principal research scientist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. On behalf of my co-organizers, I welcome you all to this virtual RDA 18 plenary session. If you have not yet done so, please take a minute to sign in the collaborative Google Doc. Leslie has put the link in the chat below the agenda. Why we are here? There are many perspectives and aspects to this question, and I will share my story to touch on a few aspects. Excuse me. Yesterday, there was no data available, and I was lucky to find one data set for my project. Have you heard of Rhino's sea surface temperature data set? And today there's so many data sets, and many of them are from trusted data source, and most, if not all, claim to have good quality. But what does that mean? How can I, as a user, readily compare those data sets to pick one that's best suited for my own application? So having consistent data quality information available is critical for data consumers to determine which data set is best suited for their particular use. However, there's a big gap between data producers and the producers of data quality information, as well as data consumers. How can we bridge this gap? How can we help data producers to demonstrate that their data set are good quality, not just claim to be good quality? Those are some of the questions that bring me here. What's your story? And we like to know. The main objective of this Bird of Feather session is to obtain feedback from the broader RDA community about forming a working group to develop RDA guidelines for making data quality information fair. That is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. A few community survey questions are included after sign-up sheets, and we appreciate your feedback and share your story, and they will inform and guide us on our future activities. Today, we have a great lineup of speakers from various disciplines talking about needs, challenges, and the best practices in their own discipline. I'm looking forward to their presentations. The questions will be discussed in the second half of the session. Please enter your question in chat or in the Google Doc. Without further ado, I will hand over the mic to Leslie to start the presentation. Each presentation is about 8 minutes, and I will give a 1-minute warning.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is run through our various domains. The work that Peng and others have been doing came out of the Earth and Environmental Sciences, but what we've done is managed to find what's going on in other communities within RDA. And so we've got quite a smorgasbord of presentations. Without further ado, I'll now ask Vaso Rakimzadeh to talk to us about data quality issues in genomic and related health. So can we start her presentation? And right, let's go. Over to you, Vaso.
Hi, everyone. Everyone can see my screen all right and can hear me okay? Excellent. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much to Peng and others for the really kind invitation to kind of represent my discipline today. So I'm a postdoc fellow with the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics, and much of my work touches on the protection, sharing, and stewardship of genomic and related health data. So a little bit different from the usual earth sciences and astronomy talks that many of you are probably more familiar with, but I wanted to emphasize that we really look to your disciplines as a beacon of data sharing, and we have a lot of lessons to learn from your fields in terms of how we allow researchers to kind of advance genomics and precision medicine forward with many of the data sharing cultures and excellence that I think your field is really set up. So today, I'll be talking about optimizing responsible stewardship of genomic data in emerging serverless computing environments. So I'm going to give a very brief background on some of the scientific and ethical imperatives for sharing genomic data, really walk you through the state of genomic data stewardship and 3 primary challenges that our field is really facing, and then hopefully at the very end give you a very brief synopsis of some future empirical work I'm hoping to conduct. So really at the very get-go, genomic and associated phenotypic data is really driving innovations in precision medicine. And this is how we're learning more about gene-disease associations. And this is only possible through gathering and collecting and storing enormous amounts of sequence data. And, in a central tenet of research ethics that we only allow research participants to be exposed to certain risks, and in this case, informational risks, unless we can truly answer meaningfully scientific questions. And so given that genomics is this data-intensive field, data sharing is actually both an ethical and scientific imperative. What's different about our types of data is that genomic data is highly identifiable. And so this requires institutional oversight to really ensure 3 axes of control over the data, that there are authorized users with appropriate credentials, that they're permitted to access certain data sets which participants have consented to future research uses, and that the data projects that those data sets are contributing to have been ethically approved by a research ethics committee as well as a data access committee. And so given, the sensitivity and the identifiability of this data, there are really 3 primary access regimes that our field works with. And so while open access genomic data are publicly available in data sets like ClinVar and dbGaP and really enormous repositories set up usually federally and nationally, controlled access data places constraints on how certain data can be used and by whom. And there are oversight bodies that adjudicate, who, when, and how that data is accessed and shared around the world. And really, it's this controlled access mechanism that is the driving force for, enabling responsible stewardship and availability of the data sets we have. And so really there are 3 primary challenges, and I think stewardship relates, very intimately with data quality, and those challenges involve regulatory issues. So there are different protections for how genomic data is protected across the world, given different data protection regimes. That really challenges cross-border transfer, so how international researchers collaborate together when they're trying to share genomic data across jurisdictions. So namely, I'm sure what's just looking at the participant list, the discrepancies and how and adequacy of data protections between GDPR and HIPAA, which is the health data protection regulation in the United States, has been quite a challenge since GDPR's enforcement in 2018. Increasingly, future consent to secondary research uses is another major challenge, in that we want to disclose research uses that participants data uses that participants have consented to, but not every secondary use is known by the participant. We don't go back often to the participant to garner explicit consent for every secondary use. And this has raised some concerns, particularly among different communities, as far as appropriately consenting to those future uses. And there are technical challenges. So as we're seeing data sets grow increasingly in complexity and in size, we're looking to migrate these large repository collections to cloud servers and co-locating both access analysis and sharing within common computing environments. And this is, not something that's new to you all, but certainly a very paradigmatic change in how data is accessed and shared in the genomics community. There are interoperability challenges between how we get clinical genomic data over to the research side and vice versa. So there are regulatory limitations, but certainly technical interoperability limitations in that electronic medical records don't easily interoperate with some of those really large research databases. And finally, last but not least, there are enormous social challenges to sharing genomic data. It's considered via public, opinion research that demonstrates people have very specific views on how secure their genomic data should be, whether they should be consented every time it's used, and there is, an exceptionalism that's viewed with genomic data that's unique to other types of health information.
One minute.
Oh, good, thanks. So, I think given this context, some of the really major challenges we're looking at is that as, these complex data sets are being collected, that it's particularly difficult to make them securely accessible and shared across these environments. And I'll just quickly go through some of these slides here. It's what you see here is a landscape of how genomic data, complexity of how genomic data flows across clinical and research environments. And I think what I'll leave you with is that some of these existing governance procedures for access that I described earlier are really based on static approaches to data generation, and they've become somewhat incompatible for the demands for real-time data access. And I think in the last maybe 30 seconds or so, I'll direct you to some future empirical work we're doing to develop a stewardship impact assessment tool with publicly funded repositories. I'm really building off of the work of Peng and others, in which we're going to survey stakeholders about some of the requisite stewardship outcomes that we should be measuring through a Delphi process, and then pilot testing those among large publicly funded genomic data repositories that hold genomic and related health data across the world. So I'll leave it there and look forward to your questions and additional thoughts in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Faso. I think in the interest of time, we'd better start reaching for the stars and move on to data quality in astronomy. And I'll ask Francois Genova to give us insights on how astronomy is handling data quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for the invitation. So in our case, we are an old discipline and we have been sharing data for a long time, as you said. So if you think about astronomy, next slide, please. If you think about astronomy, of course, you think about the big research infrastructures which are on the ground, on the top of the mountains or elsewhere or in space. But data is also a research infrastructure which is used every day by the astronomers. Next slide, please. The astronomers, as I said, really routinely use data they retrieve online in their daily research work. And this means that there is some trust in the system. There is trust in the system because there is trust in the different elements of the system. And the data infrastructures are several elements. One is, of course, the archives, which are managed by the observatories or the agencies which run the observatories. There are astronomical data centers, such as the one we have in Strasbourg. I will say a word about it later. There is also modeling data. There is data attached to publications. And there is also the framework to share data, which is an important part of the system. There are also, of course, the general context, which include, for instance, certification by Core Trust Seal, or for Europeans, the European Open Science Cloud, or the RDA. Next slide, please. So I would like to insist on the fact that data quality is, in fact, a full ecosystem which provides data to the users. In our case, the astronomers trust the data providers, which have an established role in the community context. If you run a big telescope, you are known and you have some kind of sustainability and quality in your work. So the core of the quality seen by the astronomers, I really think that it's the relevance to the user's needs, to their science needs. So what we have is that we have an internationally agreed format which includes the metadata about the data, and which means that data is reusable. We have developed standards to find, access, interoperate data, and also interoperate tools, which we call the Astronomical Virtual Observatory. This is open and inclusive as a framework, and many authorities, including the big space and ground-based agencies, publish resources in the registry of the International Virtual Observatory Alliance. Next slide, please. One of the elements of trust, it may seem a bit bizarre, is that the data is open, but not immediately. Observation time on big telescope is obtained through often a very tough competitive process, very often tough competitive process. And the observatory in general make the data available to all after a proprietary period during which only the team which proposed the observation can use the data. So this proprietary period has been and still is an important factor to make the open data policy acceptable by the community, but also to continue to have the best possible observation proposals, which means that it helps to build trust in the archive content and to get high quality data with respect to science relevance. Next slide, please. So what happens in the data management and quality management in the observatories is that the data management is very generally included in the mission and budget of the research infrastructures or of the agencies which manage data. They provide data to observers and they make them public in their archives. And data, as I said, is reusable and for most observatories available in the virtual observatory, which means findable, accessible, interoperable. There is incentive to do that. Of course, there is the open science context, but there is also a significant effect on the research infrastructure impact. Because when you provide good, useful, trusted data to the community, it is reused and it increases your impact. Next slide, please. I take the example of the Hubble Space Telescope. The data, this is the data which is in the publications using data from the space telescopes. There are publications which are published by the people who got the observation time. They are called the guest observers. There are publications which are published from data retrieved from the archive. And there are publications which use both. And you see that if the impact of your research infrastructure is measured by the number of publications, the fact to have an archive and to have good quality data is really an important factor for your impact. Next slide, please. I take here another example, which is the Strasbourg Astronomical Data Center, which provides value-added data services. It is recognized in the French National Research Infrastructure Roadmap as a research infrastructure, and it is fully trusted by the community. There are more than 1 million queries per day on the services. The services are also used by observatories, research agencies, and journals for their own needs. The work of the CDS is to curate data and to provide services to access data. One of the elements of trust seen from the outside is that we have the certification by Core Trust Seal, which I have to remind you, certifies your processes and not the data itself, not the data elements themselves. We were already fully trusted by the community, but we went through the Core Trust Seal certification to get some evaluation by outsiders of our processes. And it was also important to show that we can be evaluated positively by people who are not from the community. We have data from published papers, large surveys, and selected data from observatories, which means that we use data from trusted data providers. And the quality of the data and metadata is ensured by an integrated team of astronomers, data stewards, and IT engineers. In that case, the CDS was created in 1972, so there is nearly 50 years of expertise on data quality, the quality of the content, data and metadata, and also the quality of the services, which means the functionalities, the fact that they run smoothly, and all this has to fulfill the user's needs and expectations. Next slide, please. So the conclusions is that trust is really at the core of open science, and trust relies on the quality of the system, on the quality of data and metadata, but also, I repeat what I said at the beginning, on the quality of the whole data sharing ecosystem, which includes the format, standards, and the way all this is implemented. So quality at the core of it, it's the relevance to the user's needs, and its evaluation has to be driven by the science need. Quality and relevance in our case relies on the expertise which have been built on the long term, including the disciplinary knowledge, and for the observatories, of course, a very deep knowledge of their instruments and how they work, and capturing the provenance of the information they share. My last word is that all disciplines are different, but lessons learned can be shared. And I concur with the previous speaker on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois, for giving us the perspective on quality from astronomy. I agree with you that there are lessons we can learn. We're now going to move to another field, completely different, and that's social sciences. I'll ask Steve McGecken from the ANU Australian Social Science Data Archive to make the next presentation. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Leslie. Just to point out that we're not all that different. I agree with the last two speakers. As I say, a lot of the experiences about data sharing, oddly, there are some parallels in the social sciences to astronomers. We learned 50 years ago that we need to share data in order to compare data between countries. So there's a lot of experiences in the social sciences that, that were a lot of the science that happens in our community really depended upon the capacity to share data between countries. So as I say, we've got about, let's say, 50 to 60 years of background in doing this sort of work as well. And I'm going to reflect a bit upon some of those experiences there. I'd also say that a lot of our first speaker, Basso, a lot of the sensitive data questions that came up there are directly relevant in the social sciences as well, that we can draw upon too. So certainly we can join the dots between the two. So we just, the next slide, please. So I want to draw, broadly speaking, there's two broad areas of data that we tend to see in the social sciences. And I want to draw a contrast between the two fundamentally, between the community of official statistics providers and the research data community, the academic community. Both communities use each other's data, and there's a lot of crossover between the two. But there's quite a distinction in terms of what resourcing is available to be considering challenges of data quality. So in the official statistics world, where large resources are basically driven by international sharing and integration. Fundamentally, our international economic systems all run on these statistics. So they're very much government driven for policy agendas and so forth. So the resourcing and the investment in quality that's there in the official statistics community is pretty strong. And I'll give a couple of examples. In the research data community, while there's certainly an emphasis on understanding and the relevance of quality, it's under-resourced, it's highly diverse, so there's a lot of long tail content that's there. It tends to be driven by research needs of the researcher at that point in time. And it's very regularly shared, but it's not always quality controlled. So there's different emphasis. But as I say, there certainly is an interest in bringing the two of those considerations together. Next slide. So in the international community, as I said, the international economic systems basically drive a lot of our international government policy agendas. So they're often coordinated through international organizations. The United Nations Statistical Division, the OECD, the World Bank, all have a role in actually determining a lot of the quality standards that sit around these. And so there's a strong emphasis towards data quality to enable comparisons, particularly between countries, but both over time, temporal and geographic dimensions. And so just a couple of examples that I want to illustrate here that point to that in some of those spaces and where we talk to questions of data quality. Next slide. So a good example of this is the OECD. This is their .stat framework. We have a number of standards that are really oriented around specifying characteristics of data exchange that include determinants of data quality. So the .stat system is underpinned by a standard called SDMX. It's actually the underpinning standard behind the W3C data queue standard as well. Fundamentally, was embedded, so it was derived from the SDMX standard. And this, I've used this screen up here because this is the comparison of between countries over time on GDP per capita. But on the right-hand side here, you have very detailed descriptions of relevant information around data quality assessments that you're able to draw in there. And then these exchanges of data are actually one of the characteristics is certain quality standards that come along with them. They're embedded in that. They're formal legal exchanges, in fact. But as I say, and then that drives the data sharing systems that are there. Next slide, please. These are often then driven by data collection efforts at a country level. So there is an agreed framework for actually looking at statistical business processes. It's coordinated through the UN European Commission. But as I say, this is it's just one of their particular program areas. But as an international exchange, and you'll find a number of countries actually have developed this GSBPM model and adapted it, and this reference model to be incorporated within national systems as well. And behind that, they've extended a lot of frameworks for looking at common practices and common activities, and that includes a quality indicators framework. So I've just got a link here to the GSBPM, but and the quality indicators framework that's there, and they've tried to articulate that. So that's at an international level. We have a common reference model. And the next slide, please. And then that actually plays out then often at a national level as well. So the example from Australia, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has their data quality framework. There are parallel ones, certainly. There was a UNECE one. There was one in Statistics Canada, the three that I'm readily aware of, but as I say, they've been picked up in a number of countries. And they often include some variations on the 7 dimensions that we have here, trying to articulate and actually provide data quality statements. And in the Australian case, this has then actually been picked up across other government agencies as a structured framework for at least be able to provide data quality information. Okay, next slide, please. So while the official statistics community is very well organized, and very well supported because of this, national mandate for, an international mandate for the exchange of data and information. On the research data side, the under-resourcing and the diversity of content has made this much more difficult. It's not to say that it hasn't been a long interest here, and driven by that data exchange that are there, but the diversity of the types of data, the content and the objects and the topics of research and the methodologies used to collect data means that there's a high degree of diversity in the content that's there. So as I say, we end up with a lot of long tail research, and that makes assessment of specific dimensions of quality on a particular theme relatively challenging as a result, because there's just so much ground to actually be looking to cover. So what social science archives have worked towards is at least trying to provide some consistent comparison. Where we see that most, and the next slide, please, is in the national and international collections. So the themes that they've tended to orient around and is really focusing on metadata quality to allow people to make their own assessments of fitness for purpose of the content that's there. And then it's in larger international programs such as the European Social Survey, which is one of the European infrastructures, an international social survey program I'm involved in as well. Quality assessment frameworks are there. There's an agreed standard internationally that we share amongst the Social Science Archive, the Data Documentation Initiative, and increasing efforts on looking at integration of content through the current version, the cross-domain integration, which is the updated standard, and some efforts towards automated quality assessment as well. And I've got a couple more slides, but I'll leave it here. There's a couple of examples of how that's been played out in the social sciences in some of those tools and services.
Thanks, Steve. That was great to hear the depth at which the social sciences is getting into data quality. Now we'll move on to a presentation on Earth Sciences, community guidelines, and I'll hand over now to Bob Downs from Columbia.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely. Go ahead.
I'm going to talk about the community guidelines that the Earth Science community has been developing on data set quality. And I'm, as Leslie said, from Columbia University. We just started up the Columbia Climate School there. That's a new initiative. And my co-author is Gapeng, and she's from the Earth System Science Center at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. Next slide, please. So you might say, what is data set quality information? We've been talking about data quality information and data quality. And the differentiation here is that this is about a particular data set. That is the descriptions of the quality of a particular data set. It might be found in the papers, reports, or user guides, particularly in the quality metadata or the metadata record, if you will. Next slide, please. But the reuse is completely dependent on data set quality information. If we don't know about the quality of the data, how can we rely on the data or make any kinds of reports about the data, whether it's actually appropriate for our use or not, for example, and whether it's fit for use and even useful. The data set quality information is going to help us learn about the instruments or the variables, or how those variables are measured, how the data were collected, and about the access of the data, as well as how they might be used. Next slide, please. So looking at the different contributors to the data set quality information, It can start with the design process, either designing the instruments or designing the study itself. Those who are collecting the data have to get involved and make some assessments about the quality in terms of their work. Likewise with the processors and the producers of the data. When the data being reviewed, that's especially critical that the data quality information is captured there as well. The stewards have to make sure that that data quality information is appropriately described, and the distributors can make sure that the end users get it. But the end users of the data, they actually have an important objective here too in terms of data quality, and that if they can identify particular aspects or issues with the data quality, they can record that as well and provide that as feedback, and that would be helpful for other users down the road, as well as for the data producers and the stewards and distributors. Next slide, please. So in order for the data set quality information to be usable, we can ask ourselves, has the data set quality been assessed? And if so, has that been described? And is it understandable, either by humans or increasingly now, we should have it accessible and usable by machines? Does it help determine the usefulness of the data set and whether the data set is suitable for a particular use? And that's reminiscent of the story that Peng told us at the beginning here of the session. Next slide, please. We also should ask whether the data set quality information is fair. That is the data set quality information discoverable? Is it included with the data, that is packaged with the data that I'm trying to use? Is it sufficiently described with the data? And is it understandable? And we might even say that leads to interoperability. And in terms of reusability, are the rights for the data set quality information described? How do we know we can even access that? Ideally, we would like to see open access to the data as well as all the information that are packaged with the data. Next slide, please. So why have we developed these data set quality guidelines? We see that the data set quality information is varying considerably across various communities. And the practice of data set quality information certainly needs improvement across the board. And if we can establish a community standard that offers us some acceptable practices that we can follow. It also offers a reference so we can check against the data quality that we're developing, and can be used as training materials when we're helping young early career people to move into become either scientists or other data professionals. Next slide, please. So this data set quality guidelines development effort is really international, and there are three groups across the globe that are primarily involved in it, but many others. And these three groups who have been leading this are the ESIP Information Quality Cluster in North America, the Barcelona Supercomputer Center Evaluation Quality Control Team, it's in Europe, and then the Australia New Zealand Data Quality Interest Group in the Australian New Zealand area. Next slide, please. So I was really glad to see the process slides that Steve McEachern shared with us. And here is another way of looking at that in terms of the development of the workflow.
1 minute.
Oh, thank you. And so we, during this process of developing the guidelines, what we did have extensive community reviews and revisions. And now we have a baseline which is available publicly. Next slide, please. This is a quick summary of where you would describe the data set, utilize a structured quality assessment model, capture the quality attributes, describe the assessment method workflow and results in a human readable quality report, and report and disseminate the data quality information in an organized way. Next slide, please. And our next steps are to get you involved. We would like to get various disciplines involved in an external review and to improve the guidelines so they can be used across many disciplines. So we're inviting you to help. Next slide, please. And this is the reference to the baseline version of the guidelines. And you can see there are many people who've been involved in this process, but please consider yourself invited. We would like to get others from various disciplines involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, for your presentation, and thanks for the introduction to the Australia-New Zealand Data Quality Information Interest Group, because our next speaker is Ivana Ivanova, who is from Curtin University in Australia and is one of the leaders of that group. And she's going to present on development of geospatial data quality use cases. Over to you, Ivana.
Thank you, Leslie, and hello, everyone, wherever you are. Good morning, good night, good night, good night, good night at my end. I'd like to append to Bob's talk before and just tell you about a little bit about what came apparent during working on our data quality, fair data quality information guidelines, and that was the call for the use cases. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so I forgot to introduce myself. I work at Curtin University in Perth, Australia, and I am one of the co-authors of these wonderful guidelines. Next slide, please. We were wondering why to collect use cases, or during the work of our on our guidelines. We discovered that we are giving all these guidelines for everyone, but what for? And we'd like to actually support the rules we are putting forward with some examples why this is important. And there are few reasonings here itemized on the slide, what you see now. What we essentially want to do is for people to come forward and say, yeah, you have these baseline guidelines available, and but my case study is not represented, and all those things you are saying is not applicable in my case. So we've had these calls, and we wanted people to come forward. Next slide, please. What I said just before came apparent when we were drafting the guidelines, and that was around April, May last year. And a few case studies came forward, and each one of us of authors actually realized that it's important to reach out for people to come forward with examples. And we had our first dedicated session in June 21 on what we call a data quality workshop, and this was on behalf of Open Geospatial Consortium. So it was really about earth science or geospatial data sets quality information. related. And we had a session where people demonstrated the need for guidance in various topics, and these included all those that are in italics in this slide. Next slide, please. We are collecting these guidelines continuously since our guidelines were baselined and drafted, and we have just few of those, and all of these and all of our discussion and the guidelines relate to geospatial or earth science data, but right here, right now, there are people from other disciplines. So if you feel like there is a need for guiding in terms of what quality information to provide in order to make the data set fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, please reach out to us. And this is to hand over to my next speaker, Christine, who is one of our contributors to the use cases already and contributors to the guidelines, and will portray one of the use cases from their end and why this is needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivana. Would you like people interested in contributing contact you at the email, or you want them to enter into the spreadsheet?
Both are possible. I'm not sure if we are sharing the slides, because if we are, there is a link on the slides, but please feel free to.
Ivana, I've just put the link to the use case document in the chat, so
yes,
people can have a look at it if you want to and decide if you want to.
Thank you, Leslie, and that'd be perfect.
And Ivana's email is number 6 in the attendance list in the notes. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for inviting us. We started discussing with Ivana and Peng during this year. We are located at the Geoinformatics Lab in Dresden at the Technical University, and provide a use case on environmental sciences. So starting with a short overview, research projects in Earth system sciences are mostly data-driven and data generated, and provided in such projects fulfill high quality standards. Next slide, please. And in our GeoCo project, we have the opportunity to address data quality related aspects, as Peng already stated, from data consumer perspectives, addressing and asking for quality information needs to evaluate the fitness for use or fitness for purpose of a data set for use case or scenario. We have software engineers and related requirements to build proper tools like a dashboard. And we have the data producer's perspective, providing tools and guidance for quality tracking and quality information storing. Could you please
mute yourself if you're not talking? I can hear background. Somebody's talking.
Maybe you could mute everybody as a host. Otherwise, I will try to follow up. So in our use case, in our project, we identified that quality information is often lacks in a proper level of detail, or can hardly be compared. And that means various input data of different sources. And
I'm sorry if I can hear a conversation in the background. Please mute yourself. Leslie or Yolanda, would you trying to mute whoever is not talking since I'm
You can
sharing.
probably do it yourself, Leslie, because you are the host.
No, the
Yeah.
person who's talking is not in the attendance list.
Oh,
That's
There are
the-
people, yes, he was, yes.
Where is he?
Well, I think you can
Z.
mute everybody as a host.
There should be a setting to mute all.
对呀，底下那只是底下有牛排，上面没啥油。真的，你没尝出来吗？干巴巴的吗？
He's at the beginning of the
流了
list.
四周去了。
Leslie, if you can
The
make it,
people who have their
所以
mic
乱讲话，
open.
你不是在顶上，是吧？
Sorry about that.
换过你的飞不用。
There we are.
good. We're good, Kilo.
Okay.
Sorry,
It's fine now.
I couldn't find him on the list. Thanks for the tip where he was. Okay. Right, go on, Kristen.
Okay, sorry. So in our project, we identified that the quality information is often lacking, like stated here on the slide, or is lacks a proper level of detail or can hardly be compared. And that means various input data of different sources and quality need high preparation and integration effort, in particular, automating processes and documentation. Well, we've had on this by taking a few data sets for our project into use cases and evaluating related metadata, publications and reports. So we can only state that for a few examples. Next slide, please. And to underpin our findings, we set up a questionnaire addressing a broader audience, data producers and data consumers, to better understand the relevance, the availability and needs of quality information in Earth system science data. We used the ISO 19157 quality elements to structure our questionnaire and send it out to our network and partners. Well, unfortunately, we got 85 responders, but only around 30 were useful for the first section of our questionnaire about background information. And even less could be evaluated for the quality elements. But let me show here, what I show here is a summary of survey results underpinned with our project findings and directly discussing with our data producers and data consumers. Next slide, please. The participants described their use cases indicating where they need quality information. And without reading all these small phrases, I just want to show that use cases are heterogeneous, using oceanographic or urban data, focusing on geovisualization, map making, pattern finding, or education. Next, please. So taking the ISO quality elements for our participants, positional accuracy and temporal quality seems to be most relevant, preferably on geometry or pixel level, respectively scaled and differentiated for certain regions, topics, or time periods. And if you know the ISO elements, you will see that meter quality and usability are missing here. Both doesn't seem to be relevant for our participants' task. The participants stated that they prefer getting quality information from metadata and reports, which is shown here on the right. And positional accuracy and temporal quality should be made available via metadata, and other more complex elements like usability or logical consistency should be published in reports. And for some of the variables that are shown in the very small chart below, the training data are even relevant to evaluate the quality and fitness for use. Next, please. Comparing information needs and provision, summarizing this really quite small number of answers, we see that quality information for useful quality elements seems to be already available. However, let me point out two aspects. First, we had a lot of don't know answers or participants that skipped that questions. And second, the availability of quality information is not related to a proper or easy access. And when evaluating the responses, participants also often stated that they don't know if logical consistency, usability, or meta quality are reported and how. So for us, that could indicate that they are not aware or even not interested in those elements. Let's say positional accuracy, temporal quality, and thematic accuracy are more prominent together with completeness and maybe more interesting. Next, please. Getting more into detail, we ask if available quality information is structured using a standard. And as you see here, ISO and climate forecast are used, but in most cases, quality information is not structured, provided as text in publications, as reports, and that is the same that we found out for our use case examples. And evaluating the accessibility here on the right side is meant as I can get the required quality information without reading complex documents. It is structured, publicly available, and open access. But unfortunately, we only got a few answers here that, for example, temporal and quality and completeness information can be accessed easily. But to access usability or thematic accuracy could be more difficult. Next, please. So as some of the needed information is not available or not available in the proper format, can only hardly be accessed, the users take other aspects into account, and that is somehow already stated by the previous speakers, that the reliability of data sets, peer recommendation, or reliability of data provider play an interesting role for quality information. And finally, our users, our participants stated that they sometimes directly download the data and perform some tests to evaluate the fitness. However, we have developed a shorter version of the questionnaire, which will be sent out soon, and we would appreciate if you could support this. We will send it around the typical networks. Last slide, please. Summarizing quality-related aspects in system science from our point of view, as a mix of survey results and project intern results, there are pressing challenges, like all the high efforts to scan publications and reports. Data producers state that they mostly have methodological constraints to not provide quality information, and did not further specify that. However, for some quality elements, we can even automatically extract quality information from data sets. And when talking to our project partners, which act as data providers, they state that they are not aware of potential use cases for the data, and that they don't know what the users are interested in and which quality measures would help to understand the fitness for use. So taking all these aspects into account, we address several of them in our project by developing tools, profiles, and concepts. And we see that the researchers need proper tools to extract quality information automatically, flexible or generic metadata schemas, or profiles to store quality information. And we think that using a central register for quality measure descriptions and relation, like it is proven for thematic keywords, EPSG codes, and other things, could facilitate comparison of quality information for different data sets. So we need proper tools, proper methods, and in the end, guidance and best practice documents for both for data providers and for data users. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Kristen, for that presentation. I'll now hand back to Peng, because she's going to help lead the discussion and point out that we want to move now into this community survey, which starts on page 6 of the notes, but I'll now hand over to Peng.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the excellent presentation, and Leslie for the excellent job in facilitating the presentation. So we're moving on to the last part of the session's community discussion. We have all the presenters as a panelist, and we will go through some of the questions. Before we do, I'd like to remind the signee, if you have not done so, please put in your name and affiliation, the email in the sign-in sheet, and as well as provide some feedback and your stories about the survey questions after the sign-in sheet. So I'm going to stop sharing. That way I will be able to see the chat. Just want to see whether there's any question. Okay, I'm looking at the Google Doc. There's one question to everyone, and that's why there's no quality information appended to dataset. I guess that means currently. So I know Vaisal, you need to go at 11:30. Perhaps you could provide a quick comment.
Yeah, so I mean, at least from the genomics community, this has been raised several, I know several times among the data standards community within the Global Alliance for Genomics in Health. So this is an international consortium of standards developers, software engineers, ethicists, genomic researchers, and there's some movement to attempt to tag data sets with different quality indicators. I think there's, again, in genomic variant interpretation, there are some disagreements about what constitutes an appropriate quality indicator. You know, from the testing standpoint, one can get a genome sequence through a research context. One can also generate a sequence in a clinical context, and these have very different quality standards that when is uploaded to a research database are kind of merged and pooled together. So I think it's an essential, you know, implementation at some point, but I can only, you know, speak to what's happening currently, and that's what the major challenge is.
Thank you. And Dr. Geneva, I see you have your hand up. You need to unmute yourself.
I can unmute, thank you. I have the impression that one of the difficulties is to understand what can be used to measure or to qualify data quality. What are the parameters? It's what we just heard, I mean, from facility. So do you think that they are common? Would it make sense to try to identify whether there are common elements which could be used to qualify data quality, or to have a list of possible elements so that people can choose what is relevant for them? Does it make sense to try to work on that, or is it already done somewhere?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think when we were started to develop the Earth Science, the community guidelines for making quality information fair, and we have gone through a lot of the challenges and the needs. We actually have the white paper on that particular one. So Bob, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, Peng. And to also answer the question, I think some of the difficulty is when we start to look across disciplines, you know, each discipline is often looking at how data quality would be measured and how it would be represented in different ways. And it could be especially difficult when working in an interdisciplinary area, because those who are involved in the process might be coming from one particular discipline and thinking about it in those terms, but not necessarily thinking about it in terms that would be understood by other disciplines. And I think that emphasizes the importance of getting a transdisciplinary perspective on the data quality guidelines and getting others to contribute so that from various disciplines, so that we can improve the guidelines to help people in various disciplines to improve their data quality. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob.
Carl,
Steve, would you?
Carl has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Carl,
Carl,
go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. I was thinking that the quality also depends on the usage of the data, because you may have the same data set, which, for example, may be the recording of a spacecraft into an artificial satellite, which records data. And if you're observing a solar storm and you're observing the sky and you get all the information, if you're a solar physicist, you're more interested in the sun. If you're a cosmologist, you're more interested into the stars, and one can be the noise for the other. So a violent solar storm may be the noise for the star, while it's an excellent, so the star will be some data which are really noised. And for the solar observer, the solar storm is the data. So it will be really interesting data set. Maybe it's not a very good example.
That's exactly great point. Yes.
The quality depends on what you want to do with the data, actually.
Exactly. That's one of the challenges, and also one of the needs for quality information. Frankos, you still have your hands up?
Francois?
Or that's from previous?
Yes,
okay.
I raised it again after
Okay,
listening to Bob. I think that, I would like to understand completely. I understand that there are guidelines which have been established for a certain community, and there are two possible things around that. Either to see whether these guidelines are okay when people from other communities want to use the data for which these guidelines are relevant, or a more general issue, which is, are there kinds of general guidelines which could be a list on which people could choose which guidelines are acceptable for them. I have the impression you want comments on your guidelines for the reuse of data from the data produced by the community for which you have established the guidelines by other people. And it's a bit different from the other question.
I think maybe I can start it, then Leslie and Bob can chime in. The guidelines that we have developed, it's actually the quality, it's independent quality attributes, and we try to do so to be applicable for other disciplines as well. However, how well that's going to be, that's a part of the mission we're trying to set out to find out. As already touched on, the reason we decide to be independent of the data quality is because of the purpose for use and purpose for fitness for purpose. However, the information itself should be made available and shared readily so people can use that information to make their own decision. As Carlo has mentioned, different purpose requires, quality information might be suitable for different purpose. And I could give another example for the weather forecast. Timeliness of the data is more critical. However, for the climate science, the consistency is more important. Even if data might be a little delayed even for a year. So we decide to not focus on providing decision on which data set is good for what use, rather than say we are going to have the information available and be accessible and interoperable so people can readily get hold of them and make their own decision. I hope that answers your question. However, I want to see whether Bob and Leslie have anything to add.
I don't have anything to add, but I've actually put in the chat the guidelines that we've been discussing. These are the ones that we developed in the Earth and Space Sciences, and I think it was Climate Geospatial got involved as well. And it's quite a comprehensive document. I don't know whether you've seen it, but I guess the purpose of us running this BoF was to then see, well, what are the other domains like social science, astronomy, bioinformatics, genomics doing? And can we extend these guidelines or figure out what are the common elements across all domains, and come up with an agreed language on guidelines on quality of a data set, but more importantly, ensuring that that quality information is communicated in a fair way, i.e. it's findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, which also means it has to be machine readable. It's not just human readable, it's machine readable, because what we found is we did this work, there's a lot of stuff around, but they're kept as internal documents, like an organization will publish a data set, but their quality evaluation is something that's internal. And likewise, the model that they use to assess the quality is an internal document or something that never sees the light of day. Whereas as we move towards the world where we're open science, we're sharing the data, it's we need this information attached to the data set in a fair way.
Yeah,
Thank you, Leslie. Bob, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Peng. So, yes, as Leslie was saying, when we first thought about having this session, we thought this would be the great opportunity to bring in people from the data community that represent various disciplines, and this way getting a variety of disciplines to weigh in on the data set quality guidelines and how they might be improved would be a way that we could start to get an international agreement on these. And even though we've had a very international community already involved, it hasn't involved a lot of disciplines. And certainly there are more disciplines in RDA represented. And so if we can begin working towards this interdisciplinary perspective of the RDA data professionals, and including users and producers of data, as well as those who are the distributors and stewards, the guidelines can be improved. And I also noticed there's a note from Francoise saying completeness is important for some use cases. For others, it could be accuracy. And yes, I completely agree with that, in that we do need to get a variety of different elements that can be employed across various disciplines in order to describe data quality, but we also might find that there are some elements that are just specific to some either disciplines or subdisciplines, and it would be valuable to identify them as well. But we would probably have to organize them in such a way that we're saying, you know, in these disciplines, we also see these, et cetera, and this is how they're being used. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. We probably will see from all the presentations the methods and the quality attributes may be different for different disciplines and different uses. However, the needs for the quality information to be available and the challenges for getting the quality information to be available, to me, it's very much similar across the board. There's yeah, I see feedback from attendees on our survey questions. Thank you, everybody. And there's a comment from MLD and saying I'm interested to this bird feather to see how quality is handled means by different communities. Yes, that's very much in line with our intention and how to encourage increase of quality information within my community. MLD, if you like to elaborate a little bit, please go ahead and mute yourself.
Hello, I'm Marie-Lise Dubernay. I'm involved in atomic and molecular data and databases, and we have an interoperable infrastructure, which is called VAMDC. And so the issue of quality is both important and difficult to handle because it can have different meanings. Since there is a meaning by the producers of the atomic and molecular data, and they go by estimates of errors. Then there are some, the meaning of quality, which can be attached to the data sets. And I would make a difference between the quality of a data set and the quality of the data. That's not, I mean, of course, the quality of data is included in the data set, but there might be other issues. And as well, the quality which is expected by the users. And in our case, the users are very, very different. Very heterogeneous. They go from astrophysics, atmospheric physics, can be industrial application like lightning, for example, fusions, and so on. And even our own community will use the data and the databases, and with their own expectation of quality as well. So, so basically, yeah. So I'm interested to see a working group working on that, and that would provide guidelines so that we can try within our infrastructure, we can try to increase the quality information and to make it more rational, to see how to make it more useful for the users and so on, and try not to reinvent the wheel, because we can do it in our corner, but I think that's not very useful since we could do that at the international level with everybody.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
about quality information, I put some info about what quality information can be and how it is assessed, and from the producers, but as well, we assess the data by using them in simulation as well. And we are going to say this data set is good or this data set is recommended because it can reproduce observed data, for example, observations in astrophysics or in fusions or different. So quality issue and definition, metadata, it's a crucial problem. And I believe because we built infrastructure and the trust into infrastructure comes from the quality of the services, quality of the data sets, quality of the data. I mean, for us, it's very important that something goes out as recommendation and we can implement them, and so help people to reach their goals.
Yeah, for us too. And we'll definitely welcome your participation. And we're looking forward to working with you and the team in the future. I also have seen that there are many yeses in terms of whether we should start the data quality information working group. Again, the last call for sign up. If you have not signed up, please put your name and affiliation and email. And if you're interested in participate in the future activities on bring the data quality information to users and help data producers and make it a general cross-discipline, and please put your name and email down so we will be able to work with you more closely in the future. Let me see the time.
Yeah, I guess that's the key purpose of why we had this as a BoF, right? Was to see if there was enough interest to go ahead and form a working group in RDA to continue this topic of developing cross-domain quality guidelines that provide information that is quality information that's fair with the data set. And that's, I guess, what you're all here for. And so if you can provide feedback in the chat or sorry, in the notes, or just say +1 in the chat, because if there's only, you know, is there enough people interested in this for us to take it forward? Do you think it's worthwhile? Any quick comments?
Yes, please do that in the next couple minutes. Yeah, I see it's fired up in the Google Doc. Great, thank you. We will have time for last question from Christine Lanny. In our organization, we collect and provide ecological data to the community free of charge. Christine, would you like to unmute yourself and elaborate a little bit on your comment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I work for the U.S. National Ecological Observatory Network, and we collect data at 81 field sites across the United States, and we provide that data to researchers free of charge. And the biggest thing is ensuring trust that our data are high quality and ready for use. And so we want to make sure that we see an uptake of our data. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that the users think our data are high quality. And so we try to provide uncertainty estimates for all of our data and data flags with all of our data, and make sure that we have really good documentation about our quality. So everyone's really aware of any issues that we have found with our data. And we all try to provide pipelines where people can let us know if they find any quality issues so that we can fix those errors as quickly as possible. We have external working groups that can both inform us of quality issues and also provide recommendations. And we also have internal working groups that can kind of work out what are the root causes of any quality issues and figure out how can we efficiently fix those quality issues and then communicate errors to the public. So I guess my interest in this group is how do other groups work through these quality issues, and how do they communicate quality issues to the public in a way that is very transparent and informative, and just makes the experience very good for the research community.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We definitely want to working with the community and leveraging some of the best practices that have already been developed. Thank you very much, Christine. Steve, please go ahead and mute yourself.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I mean, the distinction here between a working group and an interest group, you know, in a sense here, just following some of the chat, it seems like there might have been, you know, saying you kind of got some draft guidelines there. What would be the next purpose of a working group specifically here? You know, beyond, you know, is it extension out of the Earth science guidelines you've developed, you know, into multiple domains? I guess that's one question I've got. The other one I'm looking at is how the machine readability of the guidelines as opposed to the machine readability, you know, the actionability of that for machines. Is an interesting comment by Ivana in the survey about,
yeah,
you know, machines can't use it. So
thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
In the interest of the time, I'm going to cut you off. My apology
Yeah.
for it. However, I do want to quickly say, Leslie can chime in. The difference between working group and interest group is that working group have deliverables in 12 to 18 months. And that's something we would like to do. And if there's enough community interest to keep it going, we could then transition into interest group. Or we could start as interest group. That's one of the questions we probably would do with the follow-on communication with the participants. Leslie, if you have anything to add, or should I go to the closing remark? We have 3 minutes.
Well, just quickly, sorry, yeah, Steve, it is a debate as to whether you go interest group or working group. So that's certainly open to comment. And someone has asked if it's possible to share the slides. I guess we'll check with the speakers if they're willing to share their slides, because we could easily link them into the document.
Yes, or even post it online. So that will be the next step, and they'll come back, check the Google Doc. So I'm going to closing the session by saying big thank you to every one of you for being here with us today and for a very productive discussion. And I'm very pleased to see there's a lot of interest here, and there's definitely a lot of discussion needs to happen. The big thank you to all invited speakers, and I also like to thank all session organizers. Some of them are not even being here for the preparation work behind the scenes. And personally, I like to thank RDA US for the support of my registration, and also thank RDA for infrastructure support, especially for Yolanda. She's been supporting this session. So thank you to everybody who has expressed interest in getting involved. We will be definitely keep you updated and welcome your participation. The last call, if you have not, please provide your contact information and express your interest, whether you are interested in getting involved. Should we start to establishing a RDA working group? If we decide to do that, the next 6 to 8 weeks, we'll be working on case statement. And if you're interested in getting involved in that, please list your name. I want to thank everybody again, and I have really enjoyed the session, presentation and the discussion, and I'm looking forward to more collaboration with you all. Leslie, Bob, Ivana, if you don't have any, do you have any last word before I close
No.
out the session?
No, I don't.
No, just to say thank you.
I also just want to say thank you.
Great. Now the session is adjourned. I'm going to stop the recording.
You just need to end the meeting thing.
Okay.
Thanks.
I want to see the chat first.
Okay.
Okay.
I have been copying the chat into the notes, but yeah, if you save the whole thing, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thanks so much, Leslie, Steve, and Ivana. I know it's really late.
Oh, I'm going to bed. I got to get up for one in the morning, so I'm going to quit now. Okay, great
Yeah.
session, Peg. Right, take care.
Thank you, and see you then.
Bye all.
Thank you, Leslie. Ciao, ciao.